Welcome. It's Facts You Don't Know. If it's your first time here and you want to find out new facts that will definitely make you smarter and more, well, and first make sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss anything.
The little black boy, only 7 years old, opened his eyes in the middle of the hospital room, convalescing. He looked at Brian C.M. and said, "Dad." The young doctor, quite seasoned up to that point in his life. In many cases, like that of little Sarabi, he felt himself breaking inside. He burst into tears as he remembered all the ways he had traveled to get there, to be in that situation and decide what he was about to do. Everything had started far off from the African continent, in white Europe, in Ireland. There, in the bosom of a Catholic family, Brian C.M. was born. The economic stability of his parents made one thing that his childhood would be serene and calm. But the political situation that was invading at that time, which would end up truncating that promising future. Ireland was at that time in an armed conflict, as a result of the clash between the official forces and the insurgent urban armed groups. And it was as a result of an explosion by the latter that Brian's parents, who were having dinner at the restaurant where the bomb exploded, fell dead instantly. At that moment, the little boy's life changed, and only a gray and suffering childhood could be foreseen. In the first months after the death of his parents, the boy's fears seemed to be fulfilled, with the conflict being the main concern of the government authorities. The problem of orphan children was dealt with at that time with relative ease, and Brian had to experience a whole time of transit, changing from one juvenile center to another, in which the food was not of very good quality and the treatment of the inmates was strong. But just when the child began to resign himself to his new life of pain, an unexpected turn would come to take him out of that hell to restore happiness. A married family who had lost their child during one of the attacks that shook the country was interested in adopting her. Because of the pain that their loss had caused them, they wanted their next child not to be conceived by them so that they could have the opportunity to give all their love to those who needed it most. The couple visited several centers for minors in the country until when they arrived at the one where Brian was hospitalized. His story catered them so much that they did not doubt for a moment that he would be the child she would finally adopt. Their decision was confirmed when they were face to face with the boy and were delighted with that little boy with blonde hair. The procedures to make the adoption effective went as quickly as possible, and in a matter of days, Brian was back under the heat of a family. The little boy's life changed forever from his childhood of hardship that were predicted for him. He grew up in a home where he lacked absolutely nothing: food, education, and lots of love. It was the recipe that his adoptive parents used to make that little boy without a future into an enthusiastic, intelligent young man with a desire to improve himself. Since his years in the juvenile center, he dreamed of being a useful doctor to society, and now at last he had a chance to do it. The decision pleased his parents, who in turn did not hesitate to support him in everything he needed. This is how that boy entered his adulthood, with a hunger for the world to show everyone what he was made of and what he was capable of. The clash of his humanistic expectations with the cold rarity of a cold academy that conceived of medicine as a means of profit was hard enough for Brian. At first, it took him to get used to. He had not a few problems with his teachers and even seriously considered withdrawing from his studies. But the voice he always knew of his parents. He never failed to give him advice and fill him with the strength to resist and not give up his dream. Brian decided that he would pursue his medical studies to the end, absorbing from his professors all the good and useful that they could convey to him and discarding his utilitarian position on medicine. He would take care of it, once graduated, to show them that he had not carried away by the ambition of money and that his mobile was still a service to society. Brian knew how to keep his words, many times with anger, but always full of patience. The young man finished his university studies in medicine, standing out as one of the best students of his generation. Graduated with honors. The first acid test he had was the offer to run a hospital in the city where he had studied. The salary was quite important and constituted an unprecedented opportunity for a recently graduated doctor. But Brian knew very well that what awaited him was a bureaucratic position that would condemn him to heavy meetings and a stressful signing of constant documents. Furthermore, the city in which he lived had one of the highest human development rates in all of Europe. There, the health system was already efficient, and he did not feel that there was that much that he could contribute more. So he turned down the hospital's offer of leadership and made a more modest decision, but one that was to change his life forever. He joined the International Red Cross. This change in expectations did not please his parents much, even if he wanted to. They were aware that they could not always be by his side, and what they longed for most when they died was to know that their son had a job to earn a living. However, when Brian reminded them that it was they who advised him to continue studying and then help others, they decided not to oppose his wishes and to resign themselves to their son being a Red Cross volunteer. Brian was never so happy as in this stage of his life. Although without money and without a steady job, the opportunity to finally realize his dreams made up for everything for that young doctor. His activities within the Red Cross went beyond the limits of the city in which he'd grown up, to begin to include hygiene and vaccination days in small rural towns where the local health system was rather deficient. Brian, at the same time, wanted more and more every day to go to more and more remote places with people in greater need, where he could actually be more useful. That day finally came. A request came from Geneva to the section of the Red Cross to which Brian was attached to nominate a local volunteer to join a program to fight hunger in Africa. Given the dedication that Brian showed in each of his jobs and given his status as a graduate doctor, local officials did not hesitate to apply for him, who in turn did not hesitate for a moment to accept the proposal. The biggest problem was communicating it to his parents. The mother cried inconsolably, asking him to please reconsider the idea, and the father even told her that if they had known that he would abandon them, they would not have adopted him. Hurt but determined not to back down, Brian waited for the indicated date to come. He packed his bags and left for the African continent. The next 6 years were spent in Africa. They were the most difficult, and at the same time the happiest of his life. Finally, Brian found his place in the world and gave himself body and soul to the care of those most in need of it. It was hard to learn about the problems of violence, hunger, lack of services, and corruption that invaded the continent. He suffered from feeling privileged compared to the enormous deficiencies that millions of human beings experience daily just to see a way. But at the same time, he felt lucky that he had decided not to be indifferent to this reality and to dedicate his life to trying to remedy it. Returning from a health brigade in a boarding school village in the African desert, Brian saw through the window of the car in which the body of a child was transported, laying in the middle of the suffocating sands. In shock and without thinking, the driver of the official car of the Red Cross shouted in despair to stop the car. He opened the door and ran towards that body. To his surprise, the boy was still breathing. So Brian rushed him to the car, where he gave first aid, barely focused on the city. The doctor directed the car to the nearest hospital, where he entered with the child on his shoulders, screaming desperately for help. Before his expression of anguish and before his official insignia of a Red Cross volunteer, the child was treated urgently and immediately admitted. For a week, Sarabi, as the boy's name was torn between life and death. They were days during which Brian did not stop visiting him for a single day, and in which he learned about the sad story of abandoned children in Africa. Without money to feed all of their children, many desert mothers are forced to abandon their children with less chance of survival. 8 days after being admitted, Sarabi finally opened his eyes, and although he'd been unconscious, his mind remembered how, in the middle of a dream, the figure of a white man who had taken him in his arms to save him from death. This man was brilliant, and being the first image he saw when he woke up, Sarabi, by spontaneous reaction, addressed him saying, "Father." That's when Brian broke down. He burst into tears as he hugged the little boy, remembering everything that had been his life, from the death of his biological parents to the trip to Africa, and seeing himself reflected in that child who, due to different circumstances, looked like him, deprived of the warmth of a family. The doctor did not think twice, and that same day he began all the necessary procedures to obtain the child's adoption. It was not easy because, despite his status as an international volunteer for the Red Cross, he was a single father who was requesting adoption and not a couple. But Brian's insistence was stronger than any red tape, and he was finally able to take custody of the little boy. With this new responsibility, the doctor understood that his cycle on the African continent had ended, so he returned with Sarabi to Ireland, where he reconciled with his parents, who happily accepted their grandson. Mind you, Brian never stopped working for others and continued to volunteer for the Red Cross. If you liked this video, don't forget to like it and leave your opinion in the comment box. Thanks for watching. Please like and share the video in social networks. We'll be right back to you as fast as we can.